government has abandoned them. The government is abandoning them because it's not reforming EI. The government has been in power since 2015 and has failed to reform EI. When the Liberal government was elected, it told us that reform was around the corner. Then in 2022, we were promised that there'd be reform in the summer. Then they swore that it would in fact take place in the fall. Here we are at the end of spring 2023. Nothing yet. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle will have another 6 minutes remaining when we return to debate. Statements by members.
Members, the Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, it's estimated that 1 in 114 Canadians, nearly 1% of our population, are affected by celiac disease, although 90% of cases remain undiagnosed. Celiac is an autoimmune disease with no cure. Unfortunately, it's often misunderstood and misdiagnosed, which can have long-term health consequences. The only treatment is gluten-free diet for life, which can be difficult and expensive. I congratulate Celiac Canada on their 50th anniversary. Founded in 1973 by 2 concerned women in Waterloo Region, Celiac Canada is a vibrant national charity, providing resources to those who need it the most. To further understand celiac disease, this morning my colleague, the Member of Parliament from Brampton South, and I co-sponsored the first ever gluten-free breakfast on Parliament Hill. To those affected by celiac, like my amazing niece Hazel, know that your voices are heard. And know that organizations like Celiac Canada are here to support, advocate, and educate. Thank you to Celiac Canada for raising awareness, improving diagnosis rates, and ensuring that people living with celiac disease can manage their condition effectively and live full and healthy lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Advantage is back. Alberta's economy has roared back to life, employment numbers are on the rise, and more Canadians are choosing to move their families to Alberta than any other province and confederation. Albertans are confident again. They're in the driver's seat for their future. But it wasn't always like this. Between 2015 and 2019, Alberta's provincial government launched headlong into a series of disastrous economic blunders that saw over 180,000 jobs lost. And small businesses were fleeing the province at unprecedented rates. Government greed led to consecutive credit downgrades, a punishing carbon tax, higher income taxes, more taxes in general, and worse services. Albertans have a choice. Continue down the path that has restored the Alberta Advantage, or go back to the job-killing, taxes-spend ways of Rachel Notley and the provincial NDP. On May 29th, choose bigger citizens over big, greedy government. Vote Conservative.
The Honourable Member for Hamilton Mountain.
I rise today to highlight the important work of yet another powerhouse woman in my riding of Hamilton Mountain, Denise Arkell. Denise joined Neighbour to Neighbour as executive director 30 years ago when she and just one other staff member pulled together an emergency food bank for an underserved community on Hamilton Mountain. Under her leadership, Neighbour to Neighbour has grown from a single service agency to one that addresses food security, literacy, life skills, community programming, and many more critical areas of need. On Hamilton Mountain, Neighbour to Neighbour is the biggest provider of social services thanks to Denise Arkell's leadership. It now counts 24 full-time staff, 350 volunteers, a food bank that serves 1,400 families a month, as well as a separate food bank that serves the trans community. Denise Arkell plans to retire in June, and I'd like to thank her for her outstanding dedication to the residents of Hamilton Mountain. Thank you, Denise. My sincerest congratulations.
L'honorable député de Beauport.
The Honourable Member for Côte-de-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, May 1st is International Workers' Day, and every employer will tell you the heart of a company is its workers. The men and women who work every single day to make our society go round. You who work and who give your time and talent for the common good, the Bloc Québécois thanks you. A big thank you to those who work in seasonal employment and who play an important role, essential role, in the local economy. Hotel industry, tourism, arts and cultures, fisheries, agriculture, construction. They are everywhere. In 2023, it is inconceivable that the federal government has not reformed the EI system. Inconceivable that this is still affecting seasonal workers. in front of my office under the rain, Action Chômage is protesting again. On this 1st of May, I would like to say thank you for your commitment, congratulations for your determination, and you will win.
L'honorable député d'Orléans.
Mr. President, le 28
On the 28th of April, I took part in the 8th edition of the Saphir Evening, an event organised by the Fondation Franco-Ontarienne to recognise the commitment, excellence and influence of women in the Francophone community. I would like to sincerely congratulate the 6 winners of the evening, as well as all the finalists. In this regard, I would like to recognise 2 finalists from my community for their leadership. Maïssa Zemni in the youth category and Lise Sarrazin in the professional of the year category.
Also, this weekend marked the 30th annual Clean Up the Capital, and I want to recognize the Blackburn Community Association and the Cardinal Creek Community Association for their effort and participation. Always a pleasure to join them and their volunteers to help clean up our community of Orléans. Merci.
The honourable member for York Simcoe.
Mr. Speaker, Liberal economic failures have forced too many Canadians into desperate situations. Some feel like they have no one to turn to. For those that are having to choose between food for the table and fuel for the car, you are not alone. For those having to turn to food banks, charity bins, and community services, you are not alone. For those who have worked their entire lives, now forced out of retirement, you are not alone. For those whose dreams of having a home and a family shattered, you are not alone. For those whose savings have evaporated and debt is piling up, you are not alone. For those who just want better for their children, you are not alone. 38 million of my friends know what that's like. They're worried about the direction Canada has taken under these Liberals. For everyone who has lost hope, know that you are not alone. Know that Conservatives will restore that hope in this country once more.
Yeah.
The honourable member for Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, I extend my greetings to the Baha'i community in Canada and across the world on the occasion of Ridwan. Ridwan is a festival of great significance to Baha'i community as it marks the birth of Baha'i faith in 1863. Ridwan commemorates the vision of peace, unity and justice that Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, shared with humanity. He said, "The well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established." Baha'is come together to celebrate Ridwan through various activities such as devotional meetings, artistic and musical presentations, and community gatherings. This festival provides a time for reflection and contemplation on the teachings of Baha'u'llah and offers an opportunity for the Baha'i community to come together in unity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, dating back to 1873, 150 years ago, Mount St. Vincent University was one of the few institutions of higher education for women and girls in Canada, and at a time when women could not vote. Today, the institution prioritizes access and impact for all underserviced groups. That's why I'm proud to see that Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry award the Mount with one of this year's 10 Dimensions recognitions last week. This initiative was led by the 3 federal granting agencies to acknowledge the work done to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in their quality research environment. The Mount was the only institution in Atlantic Canada to be recognized. I want to applaud the leadership at the Mount, all faculty and staff, and take the opportunity to congratulate all students on their upcoming convocation and Nova Scotia Senator Dr. Wanda Thomas-Bernard on receiving her honorary degree. Merci beaucoup.
Honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, today is Great Lakes Day. We are reminded of this incredible resource that Canada shares with our largest trading partner, the United States of America. These bodies of water have played an incredibly vital role in our shared economy. Roughly 25% of Canada-U.S. trade happens in the Great Lakes region. That amounts to over $270 billion. In fact, according to the Council for the Great Lakes region, if we group together the states and provinces that surround the Great Lakes, we'd have the third largest GDP in the world. Let's join together and celebrate the amazing accomplishments we've had, protecting the environment, growing the economy, but let's also recommit to protecting this incredible resource for decades to come.
The Honourable Member for Humber River, Black Creek.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As we begin the month of May with all of this rain out there, it's important to recognize that May is Vision Health Month. For over 10 years, it's had that recognition. This is a time to focus on the eye health, which we oftentimes take for granted. Last Friday, I introduced and moved my private member's bill C-284, calling for a national strategy on eye care in the second reading. This bill will have a direct positive impact on Canadians' vision health now and for generations to come. I'd like to see this piece of legislation move as fast as possible with other members of the House supporting it, so that we all might be able to celebrate it as the law of the land by the end of the year. During this month, I encourage Canadians to schedule an eye exam with an optometrist or an ophthalmologist. Additionally, we can protect our eyes by wearing sunglasses when outdoors, maintaining a healthy diet, and taking breaks from our digital devices. Let us use the month of May as an opportunity to prioritize our eye health and make positive changes towards maintaining good vision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cypress Hills, Grasslands.
Canadians are looking for a government they can trust and a government that respects them. But sadly, they're getting the opposite from these Liberals, and we can all see the results of their failed policies. The cost of living and rate of violent crime in Canada has been on the rise. The Prime Minister isn't going to fix their problem anytime soon, though, because he would rather go on vacation or off to New York to hang out with his celebrity friends. He is rather tripling the carbon tax and encouraging catch-and-release policies for violent criminals. Because of all of this, it's getting more difficult than ever for farmers to grow the food that we need to eat. It's getting more difficult for families to afford groceries and gas. And in many places, people no longer feel safe in their own communities. But our leader and our Conservative team are focused on solving these terrible problems. Conservatives want to bring home a country that rewards hard work, bring home lower taxes by scrapping the carbon tax, and bring home safety by ending failed Liberal catch-and-release policies. Canadians can count on us to deliver the trust and respect that they deserve. Let's bring it home.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverbend.
Mr. Speaker, Edmonton's violent crime rate has increased 16.5% in just 12 months. And in 2022 alone, it represented the highest number of violent criminal incidents ever reported in a single year. The even scarier part, Mr. Speaker, this trend has carried into 2023, with violent criminal occurrences increasing by 6% in the first quarter of this year compared to the first quarter of last year. In fact, we're seeing a 68% of violent offenders who were arrested and released become involved with the police again. These are the highest rates of crime in our city's history. This is why organizations across the country are calling for bail reforms to keep violent offenders behind bars. After 8 years of the Liberals' catch-and-release crime policies, Canadians don't feel safe walking down the street or taking transit. In fact, Mr. Speaker, what's even scarier is that these policies are just making it worse.
The Honourable Member for Glengarry Prescott Russell. Mr. Speaker, today is the start of Mental Health Week under the theme My Story. This campaign aims to focus on the people and communities that are committed to mental health, in order to highlight the services available in our regions and throughout Canada. That is the reason for which I would like to thank the HGH and its staff who work in mental health to deliver services for those concerned about mental health throughout our communities. For those who are looking for help, there are also other community support programs proposed by the Canada Mental Health Association, Champlain S, and the 400-odd community services in our various regions.
Thank every individual who has stepped up and stepped forward and sacrificed their time and effort to provide support for those who need it. Your work is greatly appreciated. Mr. Speaker, mental health is health, and I want to emphasize there's no shame in accessing and asking for help. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Hamilton Centre.
Congratulations to the 120,000 PSAC workers who stood strong and fought for better wages and working conditions. New Democrats offer our continued solidarity to the remaining Union of Taxation employees still left out on the picket lines fighting for their fairness. This May Day, may all workers be recognized for their hard work and receive fair compensation for their efforts. So it's only appropriate that I rise in this House of Commons to pay tribute to Carol Wall, a formidable force from the House of Labour. Carol was a lifelong Labour leader and social justice activist, having been elected VP of the Canadian Labour Congress, worked as a national negotiator for the Public Service Alliance of Canada, and was a member of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. Carol Wall's legacy as a mentor to entire generations of Labour leaders will continue to live on in the heart and soul of the movement. So on behalf of the Green side of the family, I offer her partner Jerry and her children, my cousins, Nicole, Jason, and Jeremy, and all those who are mourning her passing, our deep condolences, solidarity, and love.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Mesquinongé. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all egg-producing families in Berthier-Mesquinongé in Quebec, I would like to congratulate the egg farmers of Canada on their 50th anniversary. I would also like to highlight their commitment to becoming carbon neutral by 2050, which shows that our producers are committed to the fight against climate change. Our supply management system ensures that farmers have the profitability and ability to reinvest in their operations as our market expands. It is also about land use and food resilience. The more family farms there are, the more vibrant villages there will be. For egg farmers of Canada, this 50th anniversary is an opportunity to recognise innovative practices and effective management. Let us celebrate by protecting supply management with the adoption of C282, which would be a great gift to them. Long live the egg farmers and long live supply management.
The Honourable Member for Caribou, Prince George.
Today marks the beginning of the Canadian Mental Health Association's Mental Health Week. This year's theme is My Story. The goal is to shift beliefs and perceptions about mental health while shining a spotlight on community mental health programs and stories. Storytelling is a fundamental part of what makes us human. It connects us. It helps us feel less alone. In any given year, 1 in 5 Canadians experience a mental illness or a mental health issue. Mr. Speaker, I urge our colleagues to stop for a moment. Look around. Someone beside you, close to you, is suffering in silence. Talking about what we are feeling or what we have experienced can be difficult. But by sharing our stories, we can promote understanding. We can normalize mental health issues. We can break the stigma. This Mental Health Week, I encourage everyone to begin to have those mental health conversations. Talk to your family. Talk to a friend. Talk to a colleague. Ask them, are you okay? Those 3 words may just save someone's life. Together, we can break the stigma and prioritize mental health all year long.
The Honourable Member for Niagara Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this year, this government made a $420 million commitment to preserve and protect our Great Lakes. We committed to ensuring future generations have clean water to drink and that they can continue to enjoy the beauty and recreational opportunities along the Great Lakes shores. We committed to addressing toxins and invasive species. We committed to creating the Canada Water Agency, which will pool all our efforts, ensuring not a drop of those efforts are wasted. We committed to years of stable, predictable, and long-term funding for municipal governments to invest in water systems and shoreline protection, alleviating financial pressures on property taxes and water bills. With economic, environmental, and social groups from all 5 Great Lakes in Ottawa today, we are excited to work together alongside our U.S. partners to protect this unique resource to ensure the health, economic prosperity, and enjoyment for future generations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions, question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
On apprend aujourd'hui.
Today we learned that Beijing worked to punish a family member of a parliamentarian here in this House for a vote. And the intelligence organization of the government was aware of this for 2 years, but the Prime Minister didn't tell the member in question. It was a diplomat who is still on the website of the Chinese consulate in Toronto. Why? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely unacceptable to see anyone being intimidated, especially a member of Parliament in this House. And we are following up on this matter on the report published today. I asked different security experts to monitor the situation. This is something, obviously, that we need to take seriously, and that's what we're doing. Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Can't vote in the interests of Canada while their family members are threatened as consequence of those votes. It is unacceptable, as the Prime Minister said, which is why it's so strange that he accepted it. Right. His government produced a briefing note which exposed these threats to the MP's family 2 years ago. And yet the diplomat that worked to punish a Canadian MP's family is still in Canada when the Prime Minister could have expelled him. Why didn't he expel this diplomat?
Yeah! Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It is absolutely unacceptable for any Canadian to be subject to intimidation via foreign power, particularly threats against family and against families of members of Parliament. That's why, as the reports came out this morning, I immediately asked officials to follow up on these reports and to get to the bottom of this. I also asked for outreach both on the political and the official side to the member in question. We are going to continue to make sure this is taken extremely seriously.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, that's just false. He didn't immediately take action. He took action after the media found out about it. That's right. His government has known that a Canadian MP had his family threatened because that MP voted for human rights in the House of Commons. He knew about that for 2 years. He did exactly nothing. Furthermore, the same diplomat that orchestrated these threats against the MP's family still works in the Toronto consulate at Beijing, even though the Prime Minister has the power to expel him. Will he expel him today?
Yeah. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
As the reports were made public this morning, we followed up immediately with top officials to get all the information on this file, on what happened, on who was informed and who was not informed, to make sure that we are following up in an appropriate way. This is absolutely unacceptable, and it shouldn't have happened.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And yet he did accept it for 2 years. The same briefing note indicated 2 years ago that Beijing saw Canada as uniquely vulnerable to its interference because we have no foreign interference laws to stop them. The same laws that exist in the United States and Australia to force those paid by foreign dictatorships to register are not in existence here in Canada. Now, the CSIS warned him about this in the summer of 2021. On what date will we get a foreign influence registry to protect Canadians against these abuses?
Yeah. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
As a government, we've put in place many mechanisms to ensure that Canadians and our institutions are protected from foreign interference, and we are continuing to step up to add more. We brought in NSICOP, it's an oversight committee of parliamentarians. We brought in NSIRA. We created an elections integrity committee composed of top civil servants, and we are right now looking to establish a foreign agent registry, making sure through consultations with potentially impacted communities that it's done the right way. That's what we will continue to do to keep Canadians safe.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
More administrative and bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo to conceal his inaction. It is now required that you register if you lobby for the food bank. but it is not required to register if you do paid work on behalf of a foreign dictatorship to influence Canadian politics. But let's move over to police stations. His public safety minister claimed that all Beijing's police stations have been closed. Today, 2 of those police stations reportedly said, no, they're open, they're operating right here in Canada. Why is the Prime Minister allowing a foreign dictatorship to run police stations on our soil?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
You know, the RCMP is taking action against these foreign police stations. This is something we need to see, and I've tasked the Minister to make sure that it gets done.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, according to Pascal Fournier, the former CEO of the Trudeau Foundation, her predecessor, Mr. Rosenberg, is mixed up in the notorious 140,000 Chinese donation. He discussed directly with the donors through a Chinese regime organization, and he even issued a receipt to an address in China, and then he claimed publicly that this was a donation from a Canadian company. This is the man tasked by the Prime Minister to inquire into foreign interference, but he was involved, mixed up in it up to his neck. In the end, the Liberal inquiry into foreign interference is just smoke and mirrors. Is that right? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as everyone in this House knows full well, I have not had any contacts with the Trudeau Foundation for 10 years, but as a government, we have taken concrete actions over the past years to fight foreign interference, and we're going to continue to do the work to ensure that all Canadians are safe and that their institutions and democracy are sound. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. So the Prime Minister appointed Mr. Rosenberg, a former member of the Trudeau Foundation, who is mixed up in this Chinese interference case. And then to inquire into Chinese interference, the Prime Minister appointed David Johnston, who's also a former member of the Foundation. So anything to do with the Liberal inquiry into Chinese interference goes through these 2 men. And they are from the Trudeau Foundation, which itself is mixed up in this. Mr. Speaker, how can the Prime Minister ask Quebecers to believe this? When will we get a real public independent inquiry? Thank you. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our former Governor General, David Johnston, is responsible for determining whether and how such a public inquiry should go forward. And that is why we used an independent expert to reassure Canadians that everything possible is being done to fight interference. And we want to reinstate the trust in our institutions and in our democracy. Thank you. The Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby. New and troubling information has come to light through CSIS, which says that China considers Canada a high priority target and employs incentives and punishment to target this House and Chinese Canadians. This threatens the safety of members of Parliament, Chinese Canadians, and their families in China. It's enough, Mr. Speaker. When will the Liberals finally launch a public, independent inquiry on foreign interference in Canada? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for many years now, we have been putting in place mechanisms and programs to counter foreign interference, to ensure that everything possible is being done to fight Chinese interference. We're going to continue to use those tools. We're going to continue to put in place further tools. We know that this is an issue that Canadians take seriously, and so do we.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, that clearly shows that this Prime Minister does not understand how much this is damaging our democracy. Media reports came out today confirming that Canada is a high priority country for foreign interference from the Chinese government. MPs, their families, and even their staff are being targets of incentives and punishments, Mr. Speaker. Canadians deserve transparency, and this government has refused to call a fully public inquiry. every step of the way. Why does the government fail to bring forward the one thing that will restore trust in our democracy?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the broad range of experts who've looked into this, there are multiple opinions on whether an open public inquiry is actually the best tool to restore confidence in Canadians. That's why we tasked an independent expert in our former Governor General David Johnston to look at all the tools we have to counter foreign interference, to look at the concerns that Canadians have, and to choose the best path forward. If he chooses a public inquiry, we will absolutely move forward with a public inquiry. We will take the right tools necessary to restore Canadians' confidence.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister has to answer these questions. He's known now for 2 years that the family of a Member of Parliament was threatened for harassment and other penalties because of how he voted on human rights in the House of Commons. For 2 years, the Prime Minister did nothing to protect the family or to punish the Canadian-based Beijing diplomat who orchestrated the entire attack against that family. Can the Prime Minister confirm if the responsible diplomat from Beijing will be expelled by the end of business day today?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Speaker, I want to assure every member in this chamber that we take
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I assure every member in this chamber that we take the reports that have surfaced recently very seriously. In fact, I reached out directly to the member for Wellington Halton Hills to share my concerns. I told him that I have instructed CISA to provide him with an update, but this government will continue to take concrete actions to combat foreign interference, including the $49 million that we have allocated in Budget 2023 to protect all Canadians from foreign interference. Mr. Speaker, this is not a partisan issue. We should do this work together to protect all parliamentarians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's time for the Prime Minister to stand up and do his job. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up for once.
I just want to remind the Honourable Order. I want to remind the Honourable members to speak through the Speaker and not directly to each other. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Will the Prime Minister finally stand up for this country and its people against a foreign dictatorship that has been interfering in our land for far too long? Yes or no?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, over the heckles of the Conservatives on the other side of the aisle, this Prime Minister and our government has been standing up doing the relentless, tireless work of defense.
Okay. Order. This is not a good start to a Monday, and it started off fairly well. I just want to... Okay, wait a minute. When you start heckling the Speaker, there's a problem there. So, are we going to play nice, or do we start getting tough? I'll let the Honourable Minister for Public Safety start again, and I want to remind the Honourable members how we're going to scramble things or maybe eliminate a few questions as well. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this government has been doing the concrete, tireless work that is necessary to combat foreign interference, to protect our democratic institutions by creating new powers, adding more resources for all of the security and intelligence agencies that are there to protect our communities, our institutions, and most importantly, Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I encourage the Conservative politicians on the other side of the aisle to get behind what is a nonpartisan cause and protect Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, at least I got a direct answer. I asked if he would stand up, and of course he did not stand up, which is very clear. This Prime Minister knew for 2 years that Beijing thought Canada was uniquely vulnerable to its bullying and interference because we do not have anti-foreign interference laws, unlike the Australians and Americans. And yet, for 2 years after his intelligence bodies warned him of that, he did absolutely nothing. Will he stand up and do his job now?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, at a pretty young age, I personally learned what it was like to be targeted by an authoritarian communist regime. As a Ukrainian Canadian, I have always known that authoritarian communist regimes particularly target diaspora communities here in Canada. That is wrong, Mr. Speaker. And you know what makes it easier to target Canada and Canadian democracy? When we are divided, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has to stop hiding behind his ministers. The vacation is over. He has work to do. He wants to talk about taking partisanship out of it. You know what would have been a nonpartisan thing to do? To recognize that a Conservative MP, or that any MP for any party, had his family threatened because of a vote casted on this floor, and to take immediate action against the diplomats that did those threats. That would have been the nonpartisan thing to do. Why didn't he do it?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I want to take a moment, and it's uncharacteristic of me to express my outrage at what has happened to the member for Wellington-Halton Hills, and it could be any one of us in this House who is targeted for actions that we have taken. It is an outrage, and we should all express that collectively. This Prime Minister will continue to work for Canadians, for Canadian democracy. We will continue to stand together and make sure that any foreign interference will never be tolerated. If a diplomat has broken the Vienna Convention, he or she will be expelled. You have the
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister is running out of ministers to hide behind. While he sits there and smirks, we have a country that is under foreign influence by a dictatorship that has actually opened police stations in this country. Now, according to a report just out today, there are 2 police stations run by Beijing operating in Montreal as we speak. Will the Prime Minister stand up now and tell us how he will close down these police stations?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I assure the Conservative Leader and all members in this chamber that the RCMP have taken concrete action to disrupt and shut down police stations, and if more open up, they will remain vigilant and do the work. And Mr. Speaker, they will do that underpinned by the investments which are earmarked in Budget 2023, which, again, the Conservatives have said, without even reading the document, that they will oppose. So if they're really interested in protecting Canadians from foreign interference, and that's something we should all be united behind, then they should support Budget 2023.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know why the Prime Minister is so afraid to stand up. Maybe it's because he's ashamed that he did absolutely nothing for 2 years after knowing that a Canadian MP was threatened by a foreign dictatorship. He didn't even send the offending diplomat home, and now he's been exposed for it. Then he puts up a whole myriad of ministers to hide behind, one of whom claimed before that the Chinese police stations were closed, and we learned now that they are open. Wow. Given that we can't believe his minister, why doesn't the Prime Minister stand up and speak for himself? When will he close these stations?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, of course, as the leader...
Mr. Speaker, as the Leader of the Opposition well knows, because he was here, the Prime Minister stood in his place and answered 5 times those questions. The ministers of this House also answer questions. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, without equivocation, that the attacks that are taking place on democracy, be it by Russia, be it by China, by any authoritarian regime, are something that we must stand in unison against, Mr. Speaker. That the attack on one member of this democratic House is an attack on every single one of us. We cannot direct, Mr. Speaker, our security and intelligence, but we can sure stand up for democracy.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The revelations in committee of Pascale Fournier, the former CEO of Trudeau Foundation, are troubling. Her predecessor, Morris Rosenberg, from the foundation, was told by Beijing what the conditions were with regard to the donation. It is Beijing who dictated that Mr. Rosenberg should address the receipt to... I'm going to interrupt because I can't hear the speaker.
Is the Honourable Member done? Is the Honourable Member done? The Honourable Member is going to be done if he keeps that up.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières may restart. Mr. Speaker, the revelations in committee of Pascale Fournier, former CEO of the Trudeau Foundation, are troubling. She revealed that under her predecessor, Morris Rosenberg, the foundation was told by a Chinese association what the conditions would be around the $140,000 donation. It was Beijing that had dictated that Mr. Rosenberg should issue the receipt to China and not include the names of the donors. And this was the same person who was appointed by the Liberals to inquire into foreign interference. He concluded there was no foreign interference. Should we believe him? The Honourable Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the Prime Minister confirmed on many occasions, there is no relationship between the Prime Minister and the Trudeau Foundation. There has not been such a relationship for over 10 years. The organization is independent, and it is a nonprofit organization. And, Mr. Speaker, it is important not to undermine independent foundations in the House. If the member has questions with the foundation, that's who he should put it to. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, when Ms. Fournier realized that this donation came from Beijing, she demanded 2 things. First, an inquiry, and second, that the members of the foundation should recuse themselves from the investigation. The foundation refused both requests, and no light was shed on the matter. And yet it is from the Trudeau Foundation that the Liberals recruited their experts who were supposed to shed light on the foreign interference from China. The Liberals can no longer claim that the truth will be found by Mr. Johnston. When will they launch a public inquiry? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Johnson is the former Governor-General of Canada. He is someone that is praised across the country for his independence and his expertise, and he is someone who was appointed at the time of Mr. Harper, and all the options are open for Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Johnson must ensure that our process is rigorous, independent, and fair, and that the best approach should be chosen. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, here's a recap. In 2016, the Trudeau Foundation accepted a donation from China. Then the foundation was told by China about the conditions around this donation, and then the CEO of the foundation misled the media, saying that it came from a Canadian company. Years later, the new CEO of the foundation tried to investigate, and she was pilloried. And when Chinese interference started making the headlines, the Liberals chose two former Trudeau Foundation members, Mr. Rosenberg and Mr. Johnston. What a joke. When are we going to get a real public independent inquiry without any members of the Trudeau Foundation? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the member on the other side is seeking conspiracy theories. He is trying to create a connection that simply does not exist. The foundation in question is independent. The Prime Minister has no relation, direct or indirect, with that foundation and has not for 10 years. And that foundation is responsible for scholarships. And if the member wants to wants to use partisan attacks against an independent foundation, in my opinion, that's irresponsible.
Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, do you know what day it is today? It's tax filing deadline.
Yes.
And yet thousands of CRA workers are still on strike, and for almost 2 weeks, Canadians have been trying to get through on the phone to have their questions answered, and they have been unable to do so. The government knew when the contract was up, and it also knows when tax filing deadline is. So will the government give Canadians a break and extend the tax filing deadline and prove to the Canadians they can work instead of just hiding behind non-answers?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I've spoken on earlier occasions in this House on the respect that I have for the honourable colleague. However, he knows very well that the process of collective bargaining is instrumental in democracy. That's why the negotiations continue. We are positive about their progress. On the extension of deadlines, I wonder if the member would to follow the logic of his argument, because if the deadline is ultimately extended, there is always the possibility, of course, that benefits would be delayed for the Canada Child Benefit, for OAS, for GIS. These are the implications of what the member is bringing up.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
How can benefits be delayed if they don't even know about them? The competent Prime Minister spent 50% more on bureaucracy and still ended up with the biggest federal public service strike in history. Today is the tax filing deadline, and Canada Revenue Agency employees are still on the picket line without a deal. Taxpayers and small business owners in Saskatoon are calling the CRA with questions, but their calls are not answered. Canadians are going to miss out on benefits, be penalized, or miss the tax filing deadline altogether. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister do the right thing and extend the tax filing deadline?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The vast majority of Canadians have been filing their taxes online. That's important to note. On a case-by-case basis, it is possible for Canadians to see interest relief and penalties alleviated. Again, I emphasize that is on a case-by-case basis. And I find it a bit rich, Mr. Speaker, that the member forgets the record of the Harper government, who time and time again disrespected, in particular, CRA employees in a variety of ways by cutting their budget and intervening in their mechanisms when it came to the investigation of charities and the like. They politicized the process. We will not do that on this side.
The Honourable Member from Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, today it is the deadline to file our tax returns. But the CRA is still mixed up in a strike because of the Prime Minister's incompetence. Mr. Speaker, there is such an accumulation of a backlog and that's penalizing Canadians and who work hard. Will the Prime Minister step up and say that he will extend the deadline so that Canadians can file their taxes? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Speaking of Liberal competence, Mr. Speaker, yesterday we signed 4 agreements with the unions, and so this is a fair agreement for the employees, and it's reasonable for Canadians as well. Mr. Speaker, we continue to negotiate, we continue to bargain with the CRA, and I am convinced that it's around the table that we're going to get the best agreement for that too. Thank you.
For Churchill, Kawatnook-Askey.
Mr. Speaker, as of today, 35,000 CRA workers are still on strike fighting for a fair deal. The government is showing its true colors, seemingly blaming everyone who let this fester for almost 2 years. With the tax deadline having just passed, the government made the asinine decision to not extend it, putting Canadians at risk of penalties. Instead of going with the obvious solution, which is to offer CRA workers a fair deal, the government has decided to hold Canadians hostage due to their own incompetence. When will the Liberals deliver a fair deal to CRA workers?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, good news. We just landed a deal with the 4 public agreements for the core public service, and we are continuing to work with the CRA to make sure that we have a deal negotiated at the table. We have a reasonable deal for Canadians that is fair for public servants, and we will continue to work very hard at the table to get that next deal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for South Okanagan West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, young Canadian scientists have walked off the job today. They haven't seen a wage increase in 20 years. Here on Parliament Hill and at universities across the country, thousands of graduate students and postdoctoral fellows are rallying for the wages that they deserve. Rising living costs are forcing young Canadian scientists to abandon their studies, leave the country, or live in poverty. They deserve better, and Canada needs them to stay. So will this government finally increase graduate scholarships and postdoctoral fellowships and index them to the cost of living?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for a very important question. I think everyone in this House realizes that talent is our greatest asset, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank our young scientists, researchers, and students across the nation who are making a lot of difference in science and in studies around the country. Mr. Speaker, no one in this House can question our commitment to science. We've invested $16 billion since 2016, and more recently, on Friday, I made an historic announcement of $1.4 billion in the Canada First Research Excellence. Mr. Speaker, we want to go from world-class to world-leading, and we need our young scientists to do that.
Absolutely.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Agincourt.
As we beginning of Mental Health Week 2023, we remain committed to promoting positive mental health for everyone, including the 2S LGBTQI+ community, Indigenous people, and people of color, groups who have already faced disproportionate challenges to their mental health due to discrimination and social exclusion. Can the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions please update this House on the recent support provided to community-based projects focused on mental health promotion?
Honourable Minister for Mental Health.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for Scarborough Agincourt for not only for her question, but all her important work on this file. This morning, we kicked off Mental Health Week by announcing $2.8 million in funding to the Community-Based Research Centre. With this funding, CBRC investigators are delivering focused community-based programs that foster important resources for good mental health, including mental health literacy, social connection, and problem-solving skills to the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. Today's funding will enable more people with lived and living experience, frontline workers, and experts to support the mental health of this community.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Canada's intelligence agency warned this Liberal government that Beijing was the foremost offender for perpetrating foreign influence on Canadians and that they feared no repercussions from these Liberals. In fact, a Beijing-backed donation of $140,000 to the Trudeau Foundation was designed to influence this Prime Minister. And what did he do in response? He appointed 2 former Trudeau Foundation board members to investigate. $140,000 bought a blind eye from this Prime Minister. How can Canadians believe anything that he says about foreign influence or about the Trudeau Foundation?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the Chamber.
Mr. Speaker, we are in an inflection point in history where liberal democracies are under direct attack. We're seeing it in Europe. We're seeing it all over the world. The objective of those dictatorships, Mr. Speaker, is not to elect a political party. It is to destroy democracy, Mr. Speaker. And history will look back to this hour when we were called to stand up against tyranny, and when we were called to stand shoulder to shoulder against foreign interference, and they will ask who did the hard work of standing up against that foreign interference and who played games with it, Mr. Speaker, who stoked fear and division, and who worked to make sure that we protect our democracy.
The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Who stoked fear and division? The Prime Minister. Who's been standing but taking no action? The Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely concerned that Beijing is not at all concerned about repercussions for foreign interference in our democracy. Between the intimidation of MPs and Chinese Canadians by the communist regime, and now knowing money was directed by Beijing to the Trudeau Foundation to influence the Prime Minister, and then the appointment of a past director of the Trudeau Foundation as special rapporteur to investigate interference, this whole situation stinks. How does the Prime Minister expect us to believe anything he says about the Trudeau Foundation or about preventing foreign interference in our democracy?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask the member opposite through you that whether or not it's Russia or it's China, that our collective response to that threat on our democracy, the democracy that the member opposite has tried to defend and protect her whole life, the democracy that I have worked to try to defend and protect my whole life. The question, Mr. Speaker, is how do we work together to counter that? Instead of trying to score partisan political points or find ways to extract partisan advantage or to imply somehow that anybody is advantaged by autocrats who attempt to destroy democracy, we need to stand shoulder to shoulder, side by side against them.
That's right.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service reports that China thinks that Canada is a high-priority target for influencing legislators, business leaders, and diaspora communities in the country, and that Beijing is the primary perpetrator of foreign interference in Canada, according to CSIS. It couldn't be even clearer than that, Mr. Speaker, and the Prime Minister knows it because he got the briefing. He also knows that by accepting financial contributions from the communist regime, the Trudeau Foundation facilitated the Chinese government's influence operations. Is this why the president of the Trudeau Foundation suddenly resigned? The Honourable Public Safety Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government takes foreign interference very seriously. That's why we have already taken action to give new powers and authorities to our intelligence organizations. That's also why we're investing to protect not only our democratic institutions, but also to protect Canadians themselves. I hope that we will be able to do this work together as a team with the Conservative Party because this issue is nonpartisan. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Minister can announce that he wants to work with us in the future. But the issue we have now is that the Prime Minister and his government has been aware of the situation for years. They knew that China was a critical threat. The CSIS report says so. They've seen the report. So can the Prime Minister tell us whether he knew that the Trudeau Foundation is influenced through donations received from China and that the goal is to influence Canada? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, what China wants is for Canada to be divided. What Russia wants is for Canada to be divided. What dictators want is for democracy to be threatened, targeted. But, Mr. Speaker, I am confident that every single member in this House believes in democracy and how important it is. We all need to work together to fight to protect our democracy. We need to reassure Canadians that our democracy is strong. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, there have not been many occasions in recent history to debate cutting Canada's, and necessarily Quebec's, ties to the British monarchy. The repatriation of the Constitution, the death of Elizabeth II, or Charles III's accession to the throne are rare examples. Mr. Speaker, according to Angus Reid, Canadians, not just Quebecers, but the majority of Canadians, feel that it's time to get rid of this outdated, antiquated institution that is at odds with the very essence of democracy. The democracy, Mr. Speaker, under which we are all equal. What is the government waiting for to bid farewell to the monarchy? Finally, once and for all. The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, Today, we could be discussing fighting climate change or health, dental care, helping seniors, helping families. Well, the Bloc is showing us what its true priority is: the monarchy, reviewing the Constitution, getting everyone here to spend days, weeks, months debating the Constitution and the monarchy. That may be their priority, but it's not Quebecers' priority, nor is it the priority of Canadians. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is a defender of the status quo. If the public says we don't want a king, the Prime Minister will answer, oh, there are more important issues to address. Why doesn't the Prime Minister just admit that the Liberals are monarchists, and then we can have a real debate with them, as we do with the Conservatives? But no, the Prime Minister tells those who reject the monarchy that it's not a priority, that he has better things to do. Mr. Speaker, if the monarchy is not a priority, then why is the Prime Minister going to the King of Canada's coronation instead of going to his own party's convention? The Honourable Minister. I thank the member for informing this House of our party's Congress. There will be thousands of Liberals converging in Ottawa to talk about our party's future and the country's future. That's what we're working towards, Mr. Speaker. We want to talk about important issues for our future, for our society, for our children's future. We will meet to talk about important changes. But the Bloc Québécois is obsessed with the Canadian Constitution, while our obsession is improving Canada, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, in Neuchâtel, in Quebec, there's the Amélie Frédéric Help Group, which is also a food bank. Needs are growing. The same goes for Frigo Partage in Loretteville, the Boîte à Fagalin in Ancienne Lorette. Those who used to donate food are now going to receive food. Mr. Speaker, we're a G7 country, but Canadians are going without food, who don't have enough to eat. So when will the Prime Minister get down out of his private jet and finally understand what Canadians need? The Honourable Minister for Sport. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we agree that we need to do more to help Canadians, especially at times like these. We are still getting out of the pandemic. Inflation rates are still high. That's why the budget we introduced meets Canadians' needs and their priorities. We're going to improve health care. We are going to improve dental care everywhere in Canada. We are building the economy of tomorrow, of the future. It will be a clean economy, and it will help us reach our net zero goals. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, 1,500,000 Canadians, 1.5 million Canadians are using food banks. Mr. Speaker, rents have doubled. They have doubled as compared with 8 years ago. Mortgages are more expensive now than they were 8 years ago when the Liberals took office. Mr. Speaker, something is not right in this country. Meanwhile, what's the Prime Minister doing? He's jet-setting to New York. Now he's jet-setting back. Here's what we want, Mr. Speaker. We want the Prime Minister to get down off his golden throne, to join Canadians on the ground and tell them what he's going to do to help them. The Honourable Minister for Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Louis Saint Laurent, who I respect enormously. But it seems to me that he has missed what has gone on. The Prime Minister is, of course, listening to Canadians. Canadians asked the Prime Minister to help them with the cost of living. In our recent budget that the Conservatives will likely vote against, we have a grocery rebate, Mr. Speaker, which will help 11 million Canadians. It will help the people of Loretteville and Louis Saint Laurent. So if the member wants to help those people in his riding, he should convince his party to vote in favour of our budget. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Chemin-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, under this Liberal government, violent crime has risen 32%, while under a Conservative government, violent crime decreased by 23%. In some neighbourhoods in Montreal, hearing gunshots is now normal. This government, with its lax soft-on-crime policy, is doing nothing. Criminals are on our streets instead of being behind bars. When will the Prime Minister finally support Canadians who are now scared to walk around our streets, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Justice Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have been working for a long time with provinces in order to strengthen our conditional release and parole system. we will see the results of that soon, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to mention that provinces themselves are strengthening the way they deliver and administer the system. For example, in British Columbia or in Ontario, which has made investments. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, last week we tabled S12, which will strengthen victims' rights in cases of sexual assault. Mr. Speaker, we are working together to solve these problems in order to improve the lives of Canadians. The Honourable Member for Madawaska-Restigouche. Mr. Speaker, last week's Bill C-11 on broadcasting was passed by Parliament. It received royal assent. It was a very long and difficult process. The Conservative leader and the Conservatives found it more advantageous to stand up for billionaires and web giants rather than standing up for Canadian artists. Now, Mr. Speaker, C-11 has become law. What impact will the legislation have on our culture? The Honourable Minister. I thank my honourable colleague for his question and for his excellent work. This is indeed a great accomplishment. Now web giants will have to contribute to Canadian culture. They will have to showcase it. They will have to pay their fair share. We thank everyone in the culture sector who has been fighting for years. I thank my Liberal colleagues, my Bloc Québécois colleagues, and my NDP colleagues. We also thank the senators. This is a great moment for Canada, Mr. Speaker.
Niagara Falls.
Speaker, Canada's tourism industry and Canadians who enjoy traveling are under attack by this Liberal government's out-of-control spending and taxes. A recent report found that 6 in 10 Canadians are scaling back their summer vacation plans, while a quarter say they cannot even afford one. While Canadians struggle with affordability, this Liberal government continues to raise taxes like the carbon tax, which costs Canadians more than they get back. As the PM jet sets across the globe, hardworking Canadians also deserve a chance to enjoy a vacation. Will the Prime Minister end his punishing carbon tax?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives continue to talk down the Canadian economy. But on this side of the House, we know that Canada is the best country in the world. That's why I'm glad today to share some good news. According to preliminary data published by StatsCan on Friday, Canada's GDP is on track to grow by 2.5%. Wow. Inflation was down to 4.3% in March, and the Bank of Canada predicts it will fall to 3% in the summer. And last month, S&P reiterated our AAA credit rating.
Bravo. The Honourable Member for Banff Airdrie.
The Liberal government's carbon tax continues to drive up the price of food, forcing even more Albertans in my community to go to food banks. In fact, usage of the Airdrie Food Bank is up 40% this year, and almost half of those food bank users are children. So what does the Prime Minister have to say to those children standing in food bank lines with their parents? Is having enough to eat really too much to ask? When will the Prime Minister finally show some compassion and axe his carbon tax?
Here. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, since the government took office in 2015, we have lifted over 2.7 million Canadians out of poverty, and that includes 450,000 children. We have worked hard to support Canadians during difficult times, whether through the Canada Child Benefit, our childcare plan, increasing the Canada Workers Benefit, the grocery rebate. Conservatives say, Mr. Speaker, that they are concerned about affordability, but they vote every time against every single one of these measures that will help Canadians. Our government will push through to make sure Canadians get the support they need, with or without Conservative support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Deputy Whip.
Mr. Speaker, these non-answers from these Liberals are getting tiresome. When will the Liberals finally understand that Canadians cannot afford a vacation? They cannot afford the luxuries that these Liberals take for granted. Unfortunately, they can't afford the essentials either, like heating their homes and for food. My question is when will this Liberal Party get a clue and cancel the carbon tax?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Speaker, did you know that last week the Conservative member for Northumberland Peterborough South called the grocery rebate, quote, cheap marketing? Mr. Speaker, the grocery rebate is going to deliver support to 11 million low-income Canadians who need it. That support was supported by all parties parties in this House. So it was a real shame to see the flip-flopping Conservatives attack a policy Canadians need. But we weren't surprised, Mr. Speaker, because they care more about cheap talking points than they care about Canadians.
Bravo. The Honourable Member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadian veterans have served and sacrificed in the name of our country and should never be without a safe and affordable home. As a proud supporter of our veterans, I was pleased to see last week our government launch a new veteran homelessness program to help ensure every veteran can have a place to call home. Could the Honourable Minister of Housing, Diversity and Inclusion please elaborate and tell the House how this program will help veterans get the essential housing and services they need?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
I want to thank my honourable colleague for his question and his important work on this important issue. We know that one homeless veteran is one too many. That is why we announced the new Veteran Homelessness Program. This program will provide much-needed rent supplements and wraparound supports that are geared towards the particular needs of Canadian veterans. Those veteran-serving organizations can apply through the Infrastructure Canada website over the next 8 weeks for this important fund. This is a significant step in ensuring that each and every Canadian veteran has a safe and affordable place to call home. We will remain dedicated to those who have served us with courage and dedication.
The Honourable Member for Hamilton Centre.
Earlier in April, the Trudeau Foundation president and 8 board members resigned due to controversy over a Chinese government-linked donation. And it was alleged last week the donation wasn't even flagged as foreign money because the former Trudeau Foundation president, Morris Rosenberg, allegedly misled the public and qualified it as a Canadian-based donation. So with all these questions around the foundation and its role in foreign interference, when will this government finally clean the air and call an independent public inquiry?
Government House Leader.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, on the question of foreign interference, we are absolutely united in making sure that we have to do everything we can to protect this country. That's why the former Governor General, Mr. Johnson, was appointed to take a look at these issues. With respect to the charitable foundation that the member is attacking, I would ask him to direct his questions to that foundation. I myself was the head of one of the largest health charities in Canada and had to answer tough questions when I was with that charity. But that is an independent organization with no relationship to the Prime Minister, and that has been made clear on many occasions, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are paying more for their patented drugs than anyone else in the world, with the exception of the Americans and the Swiss. Although a reform was adopted in July, the guidelines for implementation have been a source of contention. This has resulted in a string of resignations from the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board and has led to further delays. Meanwhile, in the end, the desired changes have still not taken place, which means that Quebecers and Canadians continue to pay a high price, unlike the rest of the world. Can the Liberal government tell us what is being done to solve this problem once and for all? The Honourable Health Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for raising this important matter. He is right that the price of patented drugs are too high in Canada, especially as compared with similar countries. As he mentioned, on July 1st, 2022, we implemented new guidelines to enable us to compare our prices to the prices of other countries we wish to compare ourselves to, like the United States and Switzerland. This is with a view to ensure that patented medicines prices be brought down over the next few years. This is all the time we have for question period today.
To the presence in the gallery of the Honourable P.J. Akiaguk, Premier of Nunavut. He is accompanied by several cabinet ministers for Nunavut. The Honourable Pamela Gross, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Education. The Honourable John Main, Minister of Health. The Honourable David Akiaguk, Minister of Justice. The Honourable Joanna Koza, Minister of Environment, the Honourable David Joannissi, Minister of Community and Government Services, and the Honourable Margaret Nakasuk, Minister of Family Services. Tabling of documents. documents. Dépôt de projet de loi émanant.
Introduction of government bills.
Statements by ministers. Rapport de délégation.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Presenting reports from committees. Dépôt de projet de loi émanant.
Introduction of private members' bills.
First reading of Senate public bills. Motion.
Motions.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. The honourable member for Mission Maskey, Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, your home, my home, our home, let's bring it home. Direct flights to Amritsar. Petitioners in Mission Maskey, Fraser Canyon.